This is the inaugural JFK Facts podcast. It's kind of a dry run. It's kind of like opening in New Haven. We're not quite on Broadway yet, which is fine. The idea of the podcast is to stay current on JFK developments with an emphasis on what's new, what is happening that is new, as opposed to talking about things that are already known. So, of course, we're talking about history, so that's going to come up. But I do want to focus on new developments and also, hear from people. What do they think is going on? What do they, think is going to happen? What do they think about the JFK story then and now? So it's kind of an open forum. That's the idea. And this is our inaugural show. So I'm very glad you came on, Larry, because you are very up to date on the latest JFK developments. And in fact, I'm going to call on you to explain some things that I don't know. But I'll start more generally by saying, of course, we are approaching President Biden's December 15th deadline for full JFK disclosure. I'm referring to the memo Biden issued last October, I think it was, in which he admonished federal agencies to to start disclosing their JFK documents and only withhold documents in the rarest of cases, was Biden's words. And he set December 15th of this year as the deadline for the agencies to do just that. So that is now just how many days away is it? It's, I think, 76 days. 76 days from now, we will get another JFK document dump. So that's coming. And the process by which those documents will be made public is underway. And Larry sent out a note earlier today that actually a Saturday or this week sets a deadline, important deadline. Why don't you explain, Larry, exactly what is going on with federal agencies and the White House this week as far as the JFK Records Act goes?
Okay, so like everything else in government, there's always a long lead time for things to be made, and the Biden memo had indicated that there would be an intensive. He instructed the agencies that are still withholding records that they would do an intensive review from October 21 through December 15th. The agencies were supposed to conduct their review, and then on September 1st, they were supposed to notify NARA, the National Archives, and particularly the archivist, who now is the acting archivist, or as the new archivist wants to be called an archivist, whether they were going to request further postponements of records. They would then have a month to work out these requests with the National Archives. If at the end of September they did not reach agreement, then the agencies by October 1st are either going to have to notify NARA that they're withdrawing their request for postponement, or they have to then elevate it to the Office of Legal Counsel of the White House to have the White House make a decision. If NARA agrees with the postponement, then NARA would be notifying the president on October 1st that they agree with the postponement.
So just to recap, federal agencies have to report to the National Archives this week their plans for withholding JFK documents, and they have to reach an agreement with NARA, which is in charge of implementing the JFK Records Act. They have to reach agreement about those postponements. If they don't reach agreement, if the archive says, we don't think you should postpone those, then either the agency has to withdraw the request for postponement, or they have to take it to the White House, and the White House will decide whether it will be postponed or not.
The only change
So
is they started the process on September 1st. They were notified
right.
the NARA on September 1st, and then they had a month to negotiate. Now, I had filed a lawsuit last year to get the underlying documents in connection with the Trump postponements. And they had similar periods of time for this negotiation. And what I have seen in those documents is that initially the National Archives disagreed vehemently with the grounds for postponement from both the CIA and the FBI, lesser with the Department of Defense and Department of State. Eventually,
So
eventually,
so the archives were pushing back against the agencies, saying you shouldn't postpone or delay as much as you want.
well, no, they were
Was that
saying that the grounds they were using to request postponement were inconsistent with the JFK Records Act.
Oh, okay.
And then there were somehow the National Archives got put into the position of asking the president to postpone further the records, and that the postponement was consistent with the JFK Records Act. So even though they, in the internal communications, were objecting to the postponement requests, when they went public, the public posture was that the National Archives was agreeing with the grounds for postponement for another 3.5 years or 6 months.
So publicly they agreed, privately they were opposed.
Right, and the memos that were sent to Trump for his signature, the memo from the situation they set up was that the archivist, a month before each deadline, so it was September of 2017 and March of 2018, the archivist sent a memo to the White House saying, we are requesting an extension, and we agree that these postponements comply with the act. Now, both memos were versions 12 of. So there's a story there. I'm going to try to get those redacted records, but I bet the original memo didn't say that, and it looks
Right.
like it was originally. I have emails that are redacted, but they're going back and forth between NARA and the White House, and each one's got further edits. So somehow,
Right.
what started off as an objection through a variety of 11 drafts ended up with the National Archives requesting the president. They basically fell on their sword. And one reason, honestly, is that the archivist is dealing with officers of each of the agencies who are FOIA officers. They got to deal with them every day, on different statutes. Right. So this is sort of like inside baseball, with the government. So I'm not sure what's going to happen this time.
Let me just make a couple of observations. First of all, to everybody, to Paul and Dan, Larry Schnapf is an attorney who has done a lot of work on legal issues around the JFK Records Act. So he is explaining some of the background there. A couple of points. One, you talked about FBI and CIA. It's worth noting that those two agencies account for the vast majority of JFK records that are still being withheld. There's some 14,000 JFK documents that still have redactions. Out of those 14,000, 11,225 are generated by the CIA, and the largest part of the remainder are just generated by the FBI. So really, when we talk about agencies, we are talking for the most part about the CIA and the FBI. I think the other thing to understand about these decisions that NARA faces is, NARA is a $350 million agency. Its annual budget is $350 million. When they get into a conflict over policy with the CIA, a $10 billion a year agency, they have to defer in sort of the normal give and take of bureaucratic politics. And so Well, NARA has objected, and it's interesting to note that they did object to the grounds for postponement. You know, at the end of the day, they will feel pressure to go along with the agencies. I think the key thing in all of this, and I'd be interested in your take, Larry, if you have any sense of it, is how will the Biden administration preside over the conflict between the archives and the agencies?
Well, that's interesting because there is a archivist who had her confirmation hearing last week, so she's an appointee of of the president. Congress
Mm,
has to confirm her, but she, as a team player, like any other, like a cabinet member, if you disagree, you can make your disagreements known, but once the decision is made, your choice is to go along or resign.
right.
So, and this is a really big year for the federal government. Starting January 1st, any documents that are given to the National Archives have to be done in electronic form. The archivist and NARA is very excited about this. They're going to electronics, and I'm sure that they're going to be one part of that process. Now, the unfortunate thing was that when Biden issued his memo, he had a December 15th deadline, but then he gave the agencies, if you want to have additional time, let us know and give us the reason why. And the language that he used was not the same standard the statute provides for. So he gave them kind of an easy out. And I'm just really going to be interested to see what happens. Now, I did also, just for the listeners, um, I cobbled together a group of historians, researchers, lawyers, and open or good government organizations. We sent a letter to the House Oversight Committee that has continuing jurisdiction over the JFK Records Act. And we asked them to hold an oversight hearing. Now, because of what's going on in Congress, there was really no room on the calendar for a hearing, but they are engaging in, they have a number of oversight tools they can use. Like, for example, I gave them all of the stuff I've gotten from my lawsuit and the various other information we've gotten over the last year. And the House Oversight Committee sent those materials over to the Senate Homeland Committee in advance of the hearing for the archivist. And my
Okay.
understanding is that she was asked questions by staff about the JFK Records Act. And then just
Right.
today, I've been in weekly contact with the Oversight Committee. And last week they said they were going to kind of wait till November and then reach out to the White House. And then this morning or yesterday, I told them, by the way, there's an October 1st deadline. And I gave them a copy of the order. Apparently, they hadn't seen Biden's memo. So they're going to reach out to Biden, the White House this week, probably tomorrow, I guess, or Saturday, to see where things are. But so obviously, there's been a decision made on a number of documents. Um, and just in terms of the FBI documents, of the FBI document, there's about 6,000 documents relating to the mafia that have been withheld. And um, they, in the 2018 postponements, they were trying to postpone those documents because allegedly there were informants, and they said they couldn't tell if they were alive or not. And Hera basically said, on a Google search, I could find out. And for the ones that they can't tell whether they're alive or not, apparently there's this 100-year rule that
Right.
you basically say 100 years from the date of their birth, the records can be held back. So we'll see.
Yeah. Um, well, thanks for that update, Larry. It's going to be interesting to watch. I feel like the tone of Biden's memo last year. I don't know if the tone, but there seemed to be a certain impatience. That he was still dealing with this, and I wonder if he has gotten impatient. I think that's the hope for for real disclosure, which I'm pessimistic about. But the president has the authority. If Biden says, "Look, guys, just push all of this out there," we're not gonna play this game anymore. We could make a lot of progress, but I think for a lot of political reasons, that may be unlikely.
And of course, Jeff, we have the latest development where we think that since President Trump said he was going to declassify the records under his new theory of classification, perhaps they're already been declassified because he thought about
it. Well, when Trump had this decision in October 2017, he went on Twitter and, of course, he told a lie. He said all the JFK records have been released ahead of schedule. And that wasn't just a lie, that was a double lie because they hadn't all been released and it wasn't ahead of schedule. But in his memo about that, Trump said he had no choice. That was his words. I have no choice but to continue postponement on this. So I think Trump just threw up his hands at the whole thing and just said, whatever the CIA wants, they can have.
Yeah, and that was orchestrated because the no choice was he received a recommendation from the archives that they need, right. So that's how this whole thing was orchestrated. Basically, the archives, and when you look at when I look at the stuff I've been given, they really tried. They don't have the power that the ARB had, although they are a successor agency to the ARB. They've expressly said that. They don't have the ability to overrule like the ARB did. And so they tried their best, but when they couldn't, they were then put in the position of asking the president for a postponement because that's what someone in the White House wanted. And when Trump said that he was going to release them, that was a lie because a month before the release date, the memo had been sent from the archives to the White House. Now, whether he knew the memo was sent is another thing. But, there was, we always had heard there was a last minute change, especially in March of 2018. But the memos and the emails that I have from his lawsuit, which the government settled, clearly show that this was an ongoing process. There was never a situation where things were going to get released and then suddenly things changed.
Right. Yeah. Just for reference, when Larry refers to the ARB, he's talking about the Assassination Records Review Board, which was the original entity that reviewed and declassified documents in the mid-1990s. We one of the problems that we have now is we don't have an independent board like the review board, which had the capability to override agency decisions. The archivist is in a much weaker position when it comes to those kind of decisions. So just wanted to mention a couple of other JFK developments this week. I'll be writing about these. There's a new documentary coming about the Warren Commission. It's going to be put out by the Atlanta History Center and the Richard Russell, some research center at the University of Georgia connected with Richard Russell, the senator from Georgia who was on the Warren Commission. I think that this is going to be a conventional defense of the Warren Commission, but the lead researcher and writer on the film, I believe, is Phil Shannon, a former New York Times reporter, who does do a lot of original reporting. I disagree with him on his kind of conventional interpretation of the assassination itself, but he is definitely a reporter worth listening to and paying attention to on this subject because he really does go out and find new information, and that is actually kind of rare at this point. So that's going to air on October 5th of next week. I'll be posting something on the site about it, but might be worth checking out if you're interested in the Warren Commission.
And Jeff, there was a Professor Wilkins. He was a law school professor. He was down there in Atlanta, and we were going to get him to speak at a CAPA conference, but then he passed away unexpectedly. But he has written, he spent a lot of time with the Richard Russell archives, and he's written a number of articles, and clearly Russell, was a dissenter to the official conclusion. He didn't believe in the single bullet theory, and he had some other issues in terms of his politics, but he was tricked because he thought his dissent was going to be published and it never was. And he was infuriated. Right before he died, he went public with his. And
Yeah, no, I follow what Wilkins wrote, and I reported on that back then. And so, yeah, Russell's dissent from the Warren Commission is interesting, and I'm interested to see if this film can tell us any more about what happened and what Russell thought.
You know who paid for the film?
Russell, what's that?
You know who paid for the film? Because that often is the.
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. The but the internal divisions within the Warren Commission, were an important story, and Russell's important because he was the mentor to Lyndon Johnson, and so Russell was very close to Johnson, and I also wonder if Russell and Johnson communicated about the findings of the Warren
wasn't
Commission.
there a tape where Russell was telling LBJ he doesn't believe in the single bullet theory, and Johnson says, "Yeah, I agree with you," or whether I don't know whether he was mollifying him or not.
Yes, yes. There is on one of the Johnson White House tapes. There is that exchange. So, which is telling. So, there was some developments today. A parole hearing for Sirhan Sirhan. Some people were asking me about that. I'm not an expert on the RFK assassination, so when a news outlet called me and asked about that, I passed.
I did have one quick question. I know you've written about the what some of the key figures that are still in these files that we might get some info if Biden actually releases them. One of them being George Joannides, and I wanted to know what you thought. Given the way that the agency slowly but surely leaked who George Joannides even was. First they said that Howard was, was a routing indicator, and slowly, as they get forced to, they let little pieces out. Even if Biden wants to force them to put these out, do you think there are still ways that they can obfuscate what's still in the archives and try to not unredact things that even if he says I want it all out, are there still ways they can stop that from really happening?
Yeah, definitely. I think what they're going to say with the Joannides files is they're not JFK records because they're not in the JFK collection, which is true. They are not in the JFK collection because the CIA never disclosed their existence to the Assassination Records Review Board. The JFK Records Act is quite clear that the presumption of full disclosure continues after the end of the Assassination Records Review Board. And so if new documents are discovered that the Review Board did not find back in the 1990s, those have to be added to the JFK collection. And the Joannides documents clearly meet that criteria. Judge Thunheim filed an affidavit in my lawsuit and said that if we had known about the existence of these records, we would have declassified them all. Anna Nelson, who was a member of the Review Board, now deceased, said the same thing in a sworn affidavit for the court. And so did Jeremy Gunn, the counsel for the AARB. So there's solid grounds for saying these documents are assassination related. There are 44 Joannides documents from 1962 and 63 and 64 and 1978, 1979 that are related to his JFK work or his activities that are connected to the JFK story. So those 44 documents are withheld in their entirety, and they're kind of a roadmap to what Joannides was doing in 1963 and 1978 when he stonewalled the House Select Committee. So that's a key set of JFK records. Now, I think the CIA's position will be they're not in the collection, therefore we're not going to declassify.
Now, Jeff, does that mean that when Trump did his postponements and Biden, that those records were never subject to those orders because they're not part of the collection, they're not considered assassination records? So
Correct.
Now that raises an interesting question because the ARB is gone. Presumably, Nair is the one that would have the responsibility of identifying them as assassination records. which then obviously the CIA would object to, and then be the president to
Right.
make the decision.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's what's likely to happen is when Thunheim and Anna Nelson and Jeremy Gunn made those declarations in 2005, the CIA simply ignored them, and there was no way that the CIA, there was no review board that could compel the CIA to produce them, or they would take it to the White House. And so that's the problem we have now. Now, the archivist in 1998, when the review board went out of existence, the archive signed a memorandum of understanding with the CIA, in which the CIA said they would continue to, implement the JFK Records Act and produce any JFK records that were found subsequently under the standards of the Act. But like I was saying before, it's very difficult for the archives to go and get the CIA to respect such a request, and that's the problem that we face now. And really, the only solution I think is really real public attention, and I certainly plan to bring public attention to that body of records that you referred to, Alex, because that's a key set of records. And we can get into what might be in there, but Joannides' work was clearly, his assets were in touch with Oswald and making decisions, generating propaganda about Oswald. So his activities in 1963 are all obviously meet the criteria of assassination-related records. So that body of records is very important, and the CIA's resistance to disclosure is will also be an important feature of what happened.
Jeff, when you filed your lawsuit, did you ask the court to make a determination that they were assassination records, or the CIA?
What we did was we said the records that we are requesting should be handled under the JFK Records Act, and the court said this is a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, so we're only going to judge them under those standards, and the Freedom of Information Act standards are much weaker than the JFK Records Act standards. So they basically mooted, that argument that we had, and so they kind of put the declarations that Thunheim and the others had made. They were just kind of put to the side, and they weren't really an issue. They weren't really a legal issue in that case.
Okay.
So
because once you don't have standing, if was that the court, one of the courts that decided that there was no private right of action under the JFK Records Act?
Well, I don't think they said that in our case. They said if you want to pursue that, take it up with the archives. Okay.
All right, so there was basically right, because under FOIA there's no such thing as an assassination record. So then you just go in the regular standard exemptions, and the CIA was certain the exemption, and courts are not going to second guess the CIA usually.
Right.
Okay.
And then the CIA said that they had no records of what Joannides was doing in 1963, at a time when he was mandated to file monthly reports on what his agents and organizations were doing. So all of Joannides' monthly reports from 1962 to 1964 are not in the collection. The CIA said the reason that they're not in the collection was because Joannides was not in touch with the Cuban exiles who were in touch with Oswald, which is simply false. And that was one of the erroneous false statements that the CIA made to the review board about the Joannides files, that explanation of why those records couldn't be found. So, the lawsuit showed just how much, information there was that we are not getting about, this unexplained chapter in the story.
And then what's the story with the Harvey stuff?
Well, David filed suit for the Bill Harvey's travel records. Just by way of background, in his book, he had quoted Mark Wyatt, a State Department official who worked with Harvey, who said that he had seen Harvey on a domestic airlines flight to Dallas in the fall of 1963, and he asked Harvey, "Why are you going to Dallas?" It was very surprising to him. And he said Harvey's answer was non-responsive. Wyatt had since died, but David Talbot quoted him, and so he sued for Harvey's travel records. And the CIA just blew him off, saying, you know, that's operational material, and we don't have to provide it. And that's true. You know, under the Freedom of Information Act, CIA operational files are totally.
But he was
so,
based in Rome at that point. What kind of operation?
Yeah, right. Harvey was the chief of station in Rome. He'd been exiled because of his bitter disputes with Bobby Kennedy, and the CIA men wanted him out because he was poisoning relations with the White House, and so he was sent to Rome, where he continued in his alcoholic ways and gradually faded away in a classic burnt-out case. But David did not have any luck finding out, was that story true? Did Harvey go to Dallas in 1960?
You know, he was in Miami with Roselli a couple times, and we know he was.
Yes, he was definitely back in the United States, and he was definitely still involved in Cuba matters. We've seen that from the declassified cable traffic. Bill Harvey, you know, for example, was kept informed about the Castro assassination plots, which is not surprising because Harvey had been, at least through mid-1963, the chief of the CIA's assassination program. So, okay, we're going to have to call it a night right there. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do this every Thursday night at this time. Yeah, this is going to be a regular feature. So tune in, tell your friends, and you know, we'll see you next time.